The power of emotion, logic versus panic. To quickly demonstrate to you what I mean by the power of emotion, we'll start with a simple, fun example. As we proceed, we will specifically compare the importance of logic with the importance of raw emotion. When we're done with that, you will know why I'm interested in you exploring this subject with me, if you don't already know. Below the picture of the bees on the woman's face there, where she's all excited and scared, and they're going into her mouth. Ew. Below that, the next paragraph. Now imagine looking upwards and seeing something that you often see. A large group of a certain kind of common bird. If the birds that you imagined are not already still, if they're moving now, then imagine that the birds land. Imagine the birds landing if they weren't already still. Maybe they sit in the branches of a tree, or maybe they sit along some kind of a wire or line, like a phone line or a power line. But let's say they're in the branches of a tree like in that image. Suddenly, an unexpected and extremely loud noise startles the birds. What do you expect them to do? Will they totally ignore the sound? Will they be quiet and listen closely, calmly? They'll stop chattering and chirping, and they'll quiet down and wait to see what happens next, calm but alert? Will one bird be sent to investigate, like they'll be nominated as the scout bird or as the guinea pig, so to speak, and that bird will be sent out to investigate and will rapidly move in the direction of the noise to find out, what is that? Was that a dangerous thing, or was that what was it? Again, imagine that the noise is totally unexpected, extremely loud, and not only all of that, but the sound is also persisting. What will the group of sitting birds do, predictably, in response to that noise? How will they react? What powerful reflex will be triggered in their brain and the rest of their neurology? Instantly, they will stop sitting around in the tree and do what? Fly away. None of the birds will remain in the tree. All of them will flee, taking flight. I was giving this example to a couple people, and one of them told me that in their imagined version, the birds scattered into many different directions, but then gathered back together, like they flew into the air in different directions, and then gathered back together to fly off to some other tree or something. So they first dispersed and scattered, but then came back together in that person's imagination. So here we have another picture of some birds leaving a tree. Further, as they fly away, is it more likely that they will end up going in many different directions or all in the same direction? Ultimately, like I just said, isn't it also predictable that they will stay together as a group, or that they will, if they do disperse, that they'll cluster back together afterwards? The flock of birds may begin by going in a few different directions, but they are likely to assemble back into a tight cluster. Why do they stick together? Why do birds of a feather flock together? Because none of the individual organisms in the group are as sensitive as the entire group as a whole. As a complex system, you've got all these different ears and all these different eyes and all these different sensory organs. A group can be much more perceptive, looking in all sorts of different directions at the same time. They can have a 360-degree kind of visual field, right? All 360 degrees. Plus, if you've got a big flock spread out over, say, let me guess, you take a big room in your house, maybe it's a 500 or a 400 square foot room, 20 by 20 or something like that. Well, a flock of birds can cover a lot more ground than that. And if there is a threat, like a house cat, a threat, a hungry house cat, and that threat approaches one perimeter of the flock of birds, well, the birds that are all the way on the other side are going to have like a 40-foot or 30-foot head start if they are along with that herd, right? They may be the first birds to be exposed to the threat or to see the threat, but they may be much more safe because there's only one cat and there's 87 birds, and all 87 birds are all on the lookout for cats, and it just is good from an evolutionary perspective for the birds to flock together in some cases. The next picture down kind of has a slight pink tint, and it has a tree where most of the right side of the tree is empty, and you have lots of birds taking off. So birds flock together for safety. Maybe that's when the birds are returning to the tree. They go back to the tree later, and they hide out in the tree, and that's safe from cats and other things because they're up in the air. They have a great view. They're safe. Why are they so sensitive? Because individually they don't have a lot of logical skills. They only have 2 eyes and 2 ears each. But if you put a bunch of birds together, it increases their sensory perceptivity. However, it may actually decrease their logical processing. I don't know how logical birds are in general or an individual bird, but if you put a lot of birds together, you can actually reduce their their emphasis on logic because they may be so reliant on the rest of the herd and the sensory organs of the rest of the herd, they may be really inclined to a sudden panic when there is a loud noise. In humans, I'm just talking freely here for a moment, in humans, when there's a few people in a group, it could be a large group, but a few people can still practice logical discernment. But in many cases, flocks of humans gather together that have the same emotional experience and emotional pattern, and that emotional magnetism that draws that group together also tends to exclude any other kind of logic. So if we think of rage as having a certain kind of logic, that's a different kind of logic than disappointment, or than gratitude, or than courage. Each of those can be said to be a type of logic or a type of mode. So someone operating, an organism operating in the mode of frustration will perceive things differently than that same person would perceive if they were operating in the mode of courage or gratitude or disappointment or despair. So when you have a big group of people who are clustered together and have similar emotional experiences, it can actually impair their logic. So it's interesting sometimes to have contrasting perspectives in a group, in a family, in a marriage, in a business, in any kind of setting. It can be useful to have contrasting perspectives, and it's also interesting that some people don't seem to be able to interact with a wide variety of perspectives very well, and other people can acknowledge and respect and value a really wide range of perspectives, like rage and despair can both be seen as incredibly valuable in their own ways in certain times, very select times maybe. But if despair is so intense that I ask someone for help, that can actually be really valuable. Anybody have a comment at this point? So below the pink picture, with the tree on the left and the birds there on the other side, I'll continue reading. So that was my quick example. How important was logic to the whole process with the loud sound and the birds flying away? Would the little bird brains delicately analyze the details of their sensations and their perceptions? Would they form study groups or Facebook groups to brainstorm a few alternative interpretations and then set up experiments to precisely measure which interpretation was the most consistent with the observed evidence? So they're going to gather evidence, they're going to look at different interpretations, measure which ones are most consistent, which variable is most correlated, which has the most potential of being a causative factor. And after these birds, in this case, do all of that scientific research, then if there's still too much ambiguity, would they invent methods to gather more reliable evidence? Would they go out and form surveys, survey questions to go and find out, are the cats that are approaching us hungry? Are they salivating? You know, are they vegetarian cats? Let's go and send out a social psychology team to find out what we need to know about these birds, or sorry, these cats. So would the birds do any of those things? Of course not. While it's true that humans can be much more intelligent than birds, it's also true that the foundation of the human brain and nervous system is essentially identical with the bird brains, or the reptilian brain. The tremendous logical capacity of an alert, calm human can be suddenly interrupted simply by triggering a deep emotional reflex. Just like what happened with the group of birds startled by a noise. They just panic. They get adrenaline and cortisol and stress hormones, and they fly away, and it's very quick. And they don't know. The birds on one end of the flock may not even have heard the sound. They see the other birds taking off maybe before their ears and brain even processes the sound of the loud, startling sound. That fast, the whole flock can take up flight, as fast as they can see. So there's a variety of things that can trigger pretty extreme emotional states in humans, whether that's rage or compassion or joy, just any kind of intense or moderate emotional state, such as stress. We would call stress I could call it an emotional state. It's not an intense emotional state. Not an intense emotional. What was the word I was looking for? Anyway, state. It's not an intense emotional state, but being shy, being cautious, being alert, being antagonistic, these are being ashamed. These are powerful things. So if someone has something like that triggered very quickly, then logic may not be operating for that organism. The tremendous logical capacity of an alert, calm human, intelligent, fluent, well-studied, has lots of degrees or whatever, that can be suddenly interrupted by simply triggering a deep emotional reflex. And in the previous weeks, I gave the example of somebody receiving a notification that one of their children has gone missing or was killed in an accident of some sort. The moment that information is processed by an intelligent human organism, that's going to be a major disruption to most anything else they were doing. They're not going to, they'll finish, if they're 20 seconds from their destination and they're in traffic, they may actually complete the 20 seconds of driving to get where they're going. But they're going to interrupt most anything they're doing, and they're not going to be able to logically process other things. They're going to be completely attracted to this new subject matter with a huge shift of what? Emotion, meaning neurochemistry, hormones. Their emotion is going to concentrate, their energy is going to concentrate on the new subject. So another picture of the birds flying. And more back to the idea of the emotions, in this case, of birds. The form of terror involving an overwhelming surprise. That's what we're talking about next. The form of terror involving a surprise that is overwhelming. An overwhelming surprise triggers terror or panic. Like what happened with the bird, that's what I call panic. When any species of animal panics, whether it's an individual or a group of individuals, the brain of each creature is flooded by powerful hormones like adrenaline and cortisol. Could even be testosterone. Blood and energy is directed away from cognitive functions, from decision-making, analytical process, creative capacity, to the muscles used for major motion, fighting or fleeing, such as taking flight or flying, fighting or flying, or fight or flight. So internal organs aren't going to be as important. The cerebrum of the brain, and looking for creative solutions. And let's think about how would, if I did a nonviolent communication training and then I hear that my child is in the emergency room, it's possible that I would forget all of my communication training from Landmark Education or from NVC or from whatever it may be. Now, it's also possible that those things will be very active for me, but it's possible for someone to have a brain override where the brainstem and amygdala of the reptilian brain or bird brain are what's really active, and they have a fight or flight response with lots of adrenaline, and they're really aroused, they're really stressed. And most humans go around in that state the vast majority of the time. In the case of modern people, there's a lot of people who have trouble sleeping that and really need sleep, and are, maybe they drink coffee, maybe they smoke cigarettes, maybe they drink something else. There's a variety of things that people do because they may have so much stress, not just with electromagnetic pollution or dietary toxins or whatever, but just interpersonal stress. We've got the boss yelling at us, my mother-in-law, and she's, oh my gosh, and it's so much stress, and we have stress in our lives. So when we have all that stress, it's generally going to trigger a flood of either a small amount or a large amount of stress hormones. That is not a bad thing. That's just how biology and biochemistry and neurochemistry work. That's how it works. So we are triggered by certain things. We have the heart rate increase. We may get right into that fight mode, and you jump into a mode of verbal accusations and inventing complex webs of conspiracies against us personally or against whatever. Not to say that conspiracies do not exist, but we can be. It's amazing how creative a person with kind of a person who's in stress, it's amazing how creative they can be in a limited way. In terms of targeting some enemy for blame, they can be very creative sometimes. When I say they, I include me. Anybody under stress can misperceive things very sincerely. So when a creature panics, their brain is panicking, right? Logic then becomes totally irrelevant. Logic involves observation, like sensations. Then forming presumptions based on the observations. So I see the observations, I look at, okay, here's what they said, here's when they said it, here's the context, here's the tone of voice, and then I form presumptions based on those observations. They're presumptions. And when I'm operating calmly, I know that I'm forming presumptions. I'm doing it actively and creatively. So after I've formed presumptions, I've seen the observations, I've formed some presumptions, then I test the presumptions with experimentation. I observe for the results closely because I'm interested in whether or not my presumption, which I know is a presumption, I'm interested in whether or not it's accurate. How precise is it? Could it use refining? If I value the whole process that's underway, then I'm really interested in my presumptions and their accuracy. I'm not interested in defending them. I'm interested in clarifying them, challenging them, refining them, discarding those that are inaccurate or irrelevant, finding which ones are valuable. How? Through experimentation, through maybe talking with other people as well, but definitely experimentation is a good way to go. So if I think that my wife might be angry at me, then there are definitely things that I can say that will make it really obvious if she has latent frustration, whether it's toward me or not. I can at least, indirectly or directly, it's pretty easy for me to find out if she's frustrated or not. And if she is, it's also pretty easy for me to find out if she identifies the source of her frustration as that jerk husband, by which I mean me. Not that I'm a jerk husband. That's ridiculous. I would never. Oh my gosh.
Try daily.
She says daily. All right, fine. So, when a panic starts, I am not aware of my presumptions. All of that logical process stops completely. Instead of observing closely, creatively forming interpretations and presumptions, and then testing the presumptions with experiments to refine my presumptions and consider a spectrum of alternatives, different interpretations, different presumptions. Which one seems most consistent with what I've observed? Well, when I'm in a panic, do I do any of that? No. When someone else is in a panic, do they do any of that? No. When a big group of people is rioting, do they stop to pause to consider, wait a minute, did we make a inaccurate presumption 2 hours ago before the riot started? No one goes through that logical process during the rioting while they're actively throwing stuff and cheering and raging and yelling and screaming and running and they got all the adrenaline and cortisol. They're not having a conversation about, well, wait a minute, do you think that we might have misinterpreted blah blah blah, or do that's something. Those logical processes are things that people do in moments of calm, not in the middle of huge emotional stress hormone floods. Panic instantly overrides logic. Panic prepares an organism for a very limited range of responses, either fight or flight. I've added a few others: fight, flight, fake, or freeze. We're familiar with freezing. Well, I'll get to that in a moment. When fleeing is an option, that's typically the first choice. When there's no perception of an avenue to escape towards safety, then the typical behavioral outcome is to fight, even if that means verbally fight, like in a Facebook group, to argue, to fight. And if there's, again, no perceived avenue of escape, then freezing may be what arises. There's a big surge of emotion and hormones. If there's no way to flee, and fighting seems like a ridiculous thing, maybe they haven't seen me yet. If I feel like maybe the cat is hunting me and I'm a bird, I think maybe they haven't seen me yet. Then the bird just goes still, doesn't move, and freezes with the possibility of future fighting or even future fleeing. Next picture is a picture of a cat, and that cat is a scaredy cat with a big arched back and the hair raised up. Look at that cat. That is a scared cat. So, this is the amazing function of panic. It's really a wonderful advancement of evolution that animals have emotions in these reptilian brains and bird brains. Here's the amazing function of panic: to efficiently, instantly interrupt lower priority functions like sleeping, eating, or the logical process of intellectual exploration. Panic is the name for the biochemical, hormonal process of giving priority to safety, to creating or pursuing a system for surviving a possible emergency. So panic is the name for a system of biochemical processes that allow for organisms to survive a possible emergency. Panic is a stress response, and it's an extreme one, it's a quick one. It's not ongoing distress or agonizing or frustration. It's a very sudden thing. Now, panic can last for a period of time, certainly, but panic is a stress response, and it doesn't take much time to go from not a panic to full-scale panic. Next, we have the picture of the cute little kitten that's asleep. If we woke the cat up with a loud sound, though, it would go to panic very quickly, wouldn't it? Why? Because of powerful hormones, and because there's this huge concentration of nerves dedicated to panicking. It's a very important function for the survival of animals. Now, what I've said to you so far is probably mostly no surprise to you, right? Literally, most of what I've said, you already knew. You may have never thought of it in that particular way, but you already knew everything, probably, that I've just said. You already were familiar with almost everything. So, nothing I said was shocking if you were already familiar with it, right? No one would panic from hearing what I've said so far, right? Another cat. Now the cat's kind of tired, but the cat's looking. No one would panic yet. However, many of the people, not even cats would panic yet. However, many of the people who have the opportunity to study panic might be horrified at the idea of studying panic as it relates to them personally. My own panic? Oh, no, I don't do that. Oh, no, I don't want that. Oh, no. What is that? They're terrified or horrified of panic or terror or horror. Interesting. They may be comfortable talking about a group of birds panicking or that other person panicking or that other group of people or those silly children or those silly religious fanatics. They may be comfortable about talking about panic remote from them. But if I'm interested in exploring my own patterns of how I respond to stress and surprises and different ways that I could respond, different ways that I do respond, if I'm interested in exploring that, then will I be willing to admit the total dominance of panic over logic? When panic arises for me, it's like panic for any other creature. You've got a brainstem, you got an amygdala, you've got cortisol and adrenaline at that level. Panic overrides logic. Now, are there some people who are overall really, really calm? Maybe they have a lot of fat in their brains or for whatever other reason they are not easily triggered? Sure, there's a wide range of people that are, really low on sleep and maybe have really poor health for whatever range of reasons, and they may be really, really easy to produce a panic or some other really extreme emotional state for those people, because they may already have a lot of systematic inflammation within their body, like a lot of acidity and a lot of maybe they have an autoimmune disorder. It may be really easy to trigger those people. That's just incidental, though. If I'm interested in being powerful in regard to my own stress response, will I be willing to admit the total dominance of panic over logic, even in my own case? Will I even be willing to explore the ways that my human brain can select an action first, and then after selecting the action, my brain can also construct justifications for that action. Here's the reason why I was a jerk husband, or whatever. Of course that can happen. And of course people can experience shame and fear and paranoia and guilt and regret and any disappointment, any variety of things, and end up consciously or unconsciously creating justifications and rationalizations. And it can happen like this. I make a decision to do something, and then my brain comes up with a reason for me to do it that I can explain to somebody if I get asked. Now, I don't know if you heard the simplicity of what I just said or got the simplicity of it, but if I am looking for justifications and excuses, that's a sign of stress. I have a environment of stress in my life if I need to find justifications and excuses. Once my brain intuitively says, oh, here's the action to take, then I have this pause, half a second, a millionth of a second, 14 seconds, 3 minutes while I think up a good excuse. Now, when we take 3 minutes to do it, we're pretty conscious that that's what we're doing typically. But we may really be practicing it. We may be running through the scenarios in our head. Well, think back to what he said 2 days ago, and oh, remember what he said 3 weeks ago? Oh yeah, now that gives me a good justification to do the thing that I've already decided to do, or that I'm already inclined to do. I go back and I creatively invest energy in organizing an emotional charge that then becomes my justification. Once, and this is again not a criticism of this process, this is just how it works. When that charge or that concentration of energy is gathered, half a second later or 3 minutes later or whatever, the action that I've already got intention to do, if I can break through whatever resistance I have to doing it with that concentration of emotion and cortisol and adrenaline and oxygen and all that biochemistry, well, then I go ahead and proceed with the action. And sometimes I'm going to practice, I'm going to rehearse my reasons, my excuses, my justifications. Well, the reason that I said I would do that and then didn't do it is, how am I going to tell her? How am I going to tell him? How am I going to, whatever. We can practice these things, and that's the kind of things that humans do on occasion. That's all obviously in, given a background of stress and fear. Not a bad thing per se. It's actually a functional response. The response I'm really grateful for. The situation in which I may be afraid or distressed certainly could be one worth considering altering. But that's actually not what I'm talking about right now. I'm just talking about admitting that in the moment of powerful emotion, logic may not be all that useful, or may not be all that active. What? Available. So, great. So with the powerful emotion, it has its own momentum. It's not that linguistic activity ceases, but that linguistic activity serves the master of the demon of rage, or the demon of despair, or the angel of gratitude, or whatever, or the angel of forgiveness. Somebody could be just, again, in a strange sequence of events. I could be really scared of confronting somebody, so I'm really blind to the reality of things, and I keep being super forgiving in a way that actually is a manifestation of terror. It's not that I really have forgiven them. I'm just saying I forgive them, but it isn't necessarily that I actually have come to inner peace about some historical sequence of events. I may just be so terrified that I don't confront them or criticize them. So in that case, I withdraw criticism and I say, I forgive you out of terror, not out of sincere, calm logic. So that could, again, happen in a case where there's some social pressure present. So the logical process justifies the action after the action has been selected. So what is the purpose of this site, this article, and so on, this presentation? Why would I be interested in you? I'm interested in people who are courageous enough to develop, to actively, intentionally develop their own self-awareness about their own emotional patterns. But why? The bug-eyed, big-eyed cat is still skeptical. But why? Consider that there's an immense wave of panic that is soon to ripple across human society. Now this happens from time to time. It's always happening from time to time in various places in various amounts. But consider that there is a historically unique, immense wave of panic that is soon to ripple across human societies, lots of them. Prior to that panicking of the masses, I am interested in selecting people, identifying people who are ripe for not only remaining safe without panicking during that larger panic, but even studying the emerging panic in advance to benefit from the panic itself, or to benefit during the panic, however you want to put it, to continue to have their well-being and prosperity and health preserved and enhanced and promoted for themselves as individuals, for their families, for their extended families, for their businesses, whatever it may be. This can sound like it's a very odd and extreme thing, but it doesn't. Different people will have it be a small variation of their life or a major variation of their life in the different cases and at different times. So another picture of a cat with its hair raised, a very scared looking cat. Well, considering these cats, right, we can't just stop the function of panic from existing. And we can't stop bird brains from panicking in terror about a disturbing noise. When there's a sudden disturbing noise, bird brains do what? They panic in terror and they fly. That's what happens. We're not going to stop that. If we sedate birds to the point where they're in vegetable comas, vegetative comas, then yeah, they might not panic. We can give them lots of pharmaceutical drugs, and we can give a human population a lot of pharmaceutical drugs so that their ability to powerfully admit to stress and fear is inhibited, where they are basically subdued. And we can distract them, or they could be distracted somehow. They could distract themselves. But we're not going to stop the function of fear. We're not going to stop the function of panic. We're not going to stop the reptilian brain from being at the core of every mammal brain and every primate brain. You can't remove the reptilian brain. What you can do is develop self-awareness and develop power and peace and awareness of panic and adaptiveness, prudence. Providence means to see ahead or to see forward. Providence is actually the root of the word prudence. It's kind of sorts a contraction of the word providence, like provide. Provide means to see ahead or to look ahead, to know what people will need in advance of them needing it. I provide for the possibility that the weekend's coming and the mail will not be delivered on the weekend, or that the business that I need to buy something from, they're closed on the weekend. So I'm providing for that and providing for myself by going on Thursday or on Friday or whatever. So I've got the things that I need for the whole weekend because I know that those stores will be closed. Or I anticipate that stores may close or they may run out of supplies. So I may be interested in getting some things that are very valuable to me in advance of needing them. I provide ahead of time for myself, my family, etc. We can't stop bird brains from panicking in terror about a disturbing noise. We also cannot stop all humans from ever experiencing panic or extreme stress. It's natural, it's even healthy to be able to experience stress and panic. Of course, the capacity of humans to experience a rapid stress reflex or to panic is healthy and functional. Here we have a picture of some bees attacking a cartoon figure. What should the person do? Should they think logically? Should they be calm? Well, you can say you should be calm when a bunch of bees are flying at your ears, but when the bees are landing in your ears and stinging you, if they were ever to do that, you would probably be really interested in really simple solutions like, is there a lake nearby? I'm just going to get in the lake. I'm not going to think about my iPhone. I'm not going to think about my watch. I'm not going to think about my shoes and all that will get ruined if I jump in the lake. I'm going to jump in the lake. Why? Because there's a bunch of bees flying around my head and they're biting me and they're in my ear and right? So, if we want to be powerful in regard to panic, we want to study our own panics, social patterns of panic, and do that in advance of the actual intensity. The sudden, shocking, surprising things. So, what we can do is to study the power of emotion, like thepowerofemotion.com. So we can study the power of emotion, including the emotion of panic. as we study the power of emotion, we can actually develop our senses to respond far faster than the average human, to be more sensitive and to see things ahead of when the average human would see them. We can even distance ourselves from certain potential threats. If we identify threats much faster than other people, even if we're a little more conservative than we're a little imprecise, we could distance ourselves from certain potential threats and then more closely monitor them and measure them and identify if they are in fact threats or not. We can distance ourselves once we've identified a threat or risk. And when we distance ourselves, for instance, by turning off the television set, if somebody watches a lot of certain kinds of TV shows, not only the ads but the shows themselves set up certain kind of ways of thinking. Going to public schools sets up certain kinds of patterns of thinking. And I'm not saying people should go to private schools or homeschool or whatever. Obviously there are great public schools, and there are not all that great private schools. But if we identify a potential issue or threat or risk, and we notice that there's something that's distracting us from it, we can start to remove ourselves from those distractions. We may have been programmed to ignore or vastly underestimate certain risks or certain threats. We may be told over and over, real estate is safe. This is the safest time ever to invest in gold. This is the best opportunity ever. Stock prices are at a huge discount, or political trends are really stable. All we need to do is pass this one law, and then our state will permanently be safe from the federal government and from the global political trends and so on. Well, what if we, respecting our own health, explored risks and potential causes of panic, even historical panics, things that happened 700 years ago, 1,400 years ago, 17,000 years ago, 65 days ago, 4 years ago. We can study prior panics that were in our lifetimes or that were prominent for us, or things that are very remote for us. And we can begin to study the stress response. We're not even really studying panic anymore. Now we're studying the stress response. We're studying emotion and the immense power of emotion, even to inhibit logical functioning. And as we study emotion, using logic from a point of calm, we can have a tremendous shift in power. Power in the midst of panic, and power in the midst of everything else too, because we'll have a more developed understanding of all emotions. There's another image there of a lady quite distressed. There's a bunch of bees on her window. She's scared. She's panicking. By preparing now in advance, we can benefit from the emerging panic, or even a series of emerging panics. I'm talking about one thing in particular, but in 40 years, what we're talking about today, if I'm still alive, could be beneficial to me then with whatever panic ever arises. A small panic in my family, my granddaughter has a tantrum of panic, whatever kind of panic it is, I can be more powerful in relating to panics. I can use Rocky theme music and the Eye of the Tiger and create fun anchors and associations so that when I say, I know it's scary, but come over here, we're going to do the Rocky theme song, and we're going to dance our little dance, and we're going to do karaoke, and people can calm down sometimes even in the midst of a panic through completely nonsensical, playful ways. There's tremendous power in playing. We haven't talked about that much, but consider that there is. However, once the panic begins, it may be too late to prepare. So we can prepare now in advance, and by doing that, we can benefit from the emerging panic. The logical part of the human brain during a panic will switch off to give priority to the more ancient neurological pathways of what is called the reptilian or bird brain. So next image, we have an axe in the wall, and there's a woman there, and she doesn't have a lot of clothes on from what you can see, and oh my gosh, it's scary, and it looks like some kind of a horror movie, and it's very scary. So if you're a producer of horror movies, and you're a special effects specialist on scenes of movies, you're going to do things that are intentionally to create stress in an audience. You have the zun-chun, 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 zun-chun kind of music, for the soundtrack, and we can kind of notice how drama and stress can be constructed, whether it's in movies or in conversations or in the delusions of crowds, and how people can get to be so sincere and so confident about a presumption that's really contrary to observable facts. So we can study all these kind of things if we wanted to. I don't know that I want to get into any of that kind of stuff myself, but we could. So if we want to benefit from the emerging panic, or any emerging panic if there were to be one ever, then it would be helpful, even you must be open to studying it before it escalates, before it really gets going. If you want to benefit from something, it's really good to see it coming a little earlier. If a dam is bursting and you see it from 3 feet away from the crack, when the crack is spewing water really fast, that's a pretty dangerous position. If you're using binoculars or a telescope and you're actually 700 yards away up on a hill at high elevation and you see that crack, you're looking, I see, there it goes, it's starting, and you can start to see the water coming out. Oh, there's 6 gallons a minute. Oh, there's 60 gallons a minute. Oh, there's 600 gallons a minute. Oh, there's 65,000 gallons a minute now are coming out of the dam. The whole thing's cracked open and there it goes flowing. Well, if you're watching from a distance, what can you do? You can have your little sailboat ready and you can ride that wave if you were to want to do so. There's another picture of a fella, looks like he's getting interviewed after a killer bee attack. Lots of bee pictures here. There's a huge bee on somebody's hand. There's another couple of pictures of bees on a window. Here's my final comment. To learn more about the details of the benefits available to you in the emerging panic, simply enter your contact information, your primary email address, or maybe your Skype ID in the comment form below. Next, you'll receive a link to a schedule of upcoming opportunities for live interaction, plus additional background material.